Well, good morning and welcome to Leaders Up Close. As you know, this is our leadership seminar series. It's part of UCF's Engineering Leadership and Innovation Institute. We appreciate Duke Energy for supporting bringing in speakers. Today we are really privileged and honored to have Gene Frantz with us. He spent many years at Texas Instruments. He is a graduate here of UCF. So he was in your seat at some point. And so we're glad to have you back here and share your story. He'll probably share his story a little about the journey he's on and where he's at on that road, and maybe where you're at on your road, and some lessons learned. So please help me welcome Gene.
I always tell people I hate it when you applaud first because you haven't heard anything. I do lectures, I've done lectures all around the world, and I always feel bad because it's like now I have to live up to that applause. And so I will try to do this today. I spend my career the last 20 or 30 years in the world of innovation. If you look at corporations, we have been forced as corporations in many cases to not focus on long-term innovation, but on this month, this quarter, this year. And so I have tried to be the person who says, let me look 5 to 10 years out. And this presentation, you're not the first to hear it, you're the second. I did this presentation at Texas Instruments. I have retired from Texas Instruments as of February. I'm now at Rice University as what is called a professor in the practice. And so this was my farewell talk to the technical staff at Texas Instruments to say to them, let me leave you with what I've learned. And so let me do that. And it's, here's a bit about me. When I did my undergraduate degree here at UCF, and if you look at 1971, that was the first year anybody graduated from UCF, so I am a charter graduate, which is another explanation why I'm so old. And I worked at McDonnell Douglas full-time while I did that. My senior year at FTU at the time, I worked third shift at McDonnell Douglas. I left McDonnell Douglas at 7 in the morning, drove over here to UCF, spent the day in classes, took 17 or 18 hours each quarter. We were on the quarter system. And then went home to sleep. I was married, young married, and my wife was going to school during the day and working in the evenings, and so we would see each other from 9 to 10 o'clock over dinner, and then I'd go back to work. And I did that for a full year to get to graduate. The good news is I was one of the few graduates who had a job offer in 1971. I had a draft notice. You might call it a job offer you couldn't refuse. I had found out that McDonnell Douglas had a Canadian facility. I asked to be transferred. And they said, no, we'll just bring you back. You're not going up there to avoid the draft. So then I spent 2 years in the Army as an enlisted engineer, which is kind of interesting to be an E4, E3, E4 private or a corporal. Doing engineering, I went out many times to our customers or our vendors to verify that they were doing their job correctly. I actually went out as a civilian rather than as an E3 because the corporation would be insulted that they had sent a private to see how they were doing. And so I went out as Mr. Frantz. So nobody outside of Fort Huachuca, anybody know where Fort Huachuca, Arizona is? It's too bad. I always say nobody knows where Fort Huachuca, Arizona is. That's why it was the communications command for the Army and keeping up with that. And then I spent a long time in Texas Instruments, and people ask me all the time, well, why didn't you leave? Why'd you stay all those years? And I think you'll find as I go through this talk, why I stayed, and it's because I was allowed to do what I love to do, and that's to create that next business. So let me get started on that and see where I can go. before I start, I want to put in perspective what I believe innovation is. And these 5 statements help understand how I see innovation in the world that we're in. And it goes like this. There's this thing called knowledge. That's what you're getting here at the university. And that's knowing the right answer. And if any of you have taken a test, you understand that not knowledge is not knowing the right answer. And you get graded down for it. Intelligence is what your professors are trying to show you, is that they're intelligent because they always ask the right question. But there's that next step, which is creativity, which is asking the question for which there's no answer. And then it follows by innovation, which is answering that question. And you'll find that in many cases, we as engineers are very innovative, just not very creative, because we're afraid to ask the question that doesn't have an answer. In fact, as I've gone around the world presenting, I call them the crazies of the world because they're creating our future. I used to call them the lunatic fringe until I gave a talk similar to this in Paris. And my French colleague afterwards said, you know, the audience thought you said lunatic French. And without thinking, which I do a lot of, I responded, I would never say that because that would be redundant. Now with that, are there anybody here from France? Okay, I got away with it. I also got him mad at me as we were walking to the venue and there was a Starbucks, and I said, finally, a good cup of coffee in France. That didn't go over well either. But notice there's something after innovation that's vitally important, and that's business. And business is making money on that answer. If in fact we do an innovation and we can't make money on it, why did we do it? If in fact we ask a question for which there's no answer, but you can't make money on the answer, why did we ask the question? And so that's a part of this process of learning down to business, and that is we need to have all of those steps. So, what I did at TI was innovation, and in a lot of cases creativity. And so I had a whole lot of challenges that I wanted to leave with the innovator, and I'll go through these one at a time. And so the challenges are: take on the impossible, solve the whole problem. Don't take no to mean no. Any 2-year-old child knows that. Be patient, be global, change the world. And finally, always deal with integrity. I think and I want to spend a bit of time on that last one. Integrity is all we really have to build strong relationships with. That's trust. I spent a lot of my career talking to small startup companies who said, we need an NDA so we can tell you what we're doing. I said, we will get the NDA, but I need to let you understand that if I violate the NDA, it is just expensive for TI, it is fatal for you. And so I began to work with many of these companies mostly on a handshake, trust. And so we'll get to that as we go through it. So let me get through this. This is one of the first opportunities I had to innovate. It was called Speak and Spell. Most of you are too young to even know what it is. But it had its moment in the world of digital signal processing, where we pulled the concepts of digital signal processing out of the university and out of high performance usage in military applications and made a toy of it. And so that was the aha moment in the industry that, oh, you can use digital signal processing to do a toy. Maybe we can use it for other things. And so that began this new evolution of what else could we do with the DSP. I'm one of the 4 that started. There were 4 that started. And I always like to ask people to pick me out. Anybody have an idea which one of the 4 I am? Down there in the corner?
Long wavy hair.
Long wavy hair? I can't even see that good. No, that's the guy who architected all of the devices. His name is Larry Branningham. He was 26 when we started the program. And he did architecture for 3 brand new integrated circuits, one of them being this, the digital signal processor. I'll let you know. I'm on the other side. I'm on the far left. The young, good-looking kid. I heard that laughing. Well, nice. But if you think about that, what we had going for us is when we looked at the industry, the industrial experts said it was impossible to do a speech synthesis device. When we went to the educator to help us pick the vocabulary, he told us that we were doing everything wrong, we were teaching the wrong method, we were using all capital in our display because there was nothing else available, and children couldn't learn to spell until after they learned to read and write, which meant they didn't learn to spell until the 3rd grade. And we were trying to get a preschool through 3rd grade vocabulary. And so he just basically said, don't do it. It's stupid, get out of it. We went to focus groups to parents of children because they were the ones who were going to buy the product. And we used a cassette tape recorder. Most of you don't even know what that is. And a pull string toy to try to demonstrate its capability, and they concluded that it would be a boring teacher-like thing, it'd be too expensive and too unreliable, and so they weren't going to buy it. So let's review the bidding so far. The technical community said it couldn't be done, the educator said it was the wrong thing to do, and the parents said we won't buy it anyway. So what did we do? We chose not to tell our management. and as much as that sounds like I've just badmouthed all management, I haven't. Our management actually was very wise in that they backed away from us. They were so certain it would fail that they left us alone. No, but that sounds bad again. So far, 2 strikes against management. They allowed us to continue. They allowed to fund us and to allow us to fail because there was a chance that would not be a failure but a success. That's good management. And the last slide I have here is if you plan on being one of those managers, what are some rules you need to have on how to manage that creative, innovative person? And so we succeeded at this and broke through states of the art. It was so much fun when military organizations, and we even had, I think, 1 or 2 nations call us and say, we kind of feel funny talking to a toy manufacturer, could we come and talk to you about your technology? That's the kind of thing we did. Now, it wasn't just the 4 of us that did it, we just started it. There was probably 40 or 50 or 60 people by the time we were done that all took part in it to make it happen. So, first rule, take on the impossible. In fact, I have a simple rule. There are 2 definitions of impossible. One says it can't be done. The other one says it hasn't been done yet. I like the second rule because that's really what we're after. So let's go on. This is another one I got to start. The answering machine. Now, most of you think the digital answering machine is such a standard thing. Why would anybody even want to talk about it? I got to be with a little startup company that was using TI components called DSP Group. You can look them up now. They're a fairly large company. TI was not happy that I helped a small company become very large, but I did. And we had this problem. We were doing digital speech. We needed about 30 minutes worth of recording. And to do that, you couldn't afford the DRAMs necessary to store all the data. And between their CEO and me, we decided that maybe we could use bad DRAMs. And so at the time, TI had a DRAM organization, so we went over and they said, we want to buy your bad DRAMs. And the typical answer, we don't make bad DRAMs. Okay. And so I said, can you help me write a spec of a device that would guarantee 100% yield? We don't have a yield loss. And so I wrote a spec on what the ARAM, audio RAM needed to be, gave it to him and said, here's what we'd like to buy. And they finally got tired of talking to us. They said, what we're going to do is we're going to take devices off of burn-in that have failed. We know they've failed. They have just failed. We know it. And we'll give you some of those to show you that you don't know what you're talking about. Fine. A couple weeks later, I called the manager and I said, where are our bad DRAMs? And he said, well, when we tested them against your spec, they all passed. I said, I figured that. And so we started using ARAMs, which were bad DRAMs. Now it ended up 6 or 8 months later, I went back and talked to this manager, and he began to tell how brilliant he was because he had created this new business called ARAMs, and they were making a fortune. And I seem to remember a different story, but the way he told it, he had thought of it all and made it happen. And so they began to have this concern that they were going to sell so many ARAMs, they might have to start selling good DRAMs to fulfill all of their demand. Isn't that great? But what we did is we didn't have a DRAM problem. We had a DSP problem. And so, but to solve the whole thing, we had to go solve somebody else's problem. And so the idea is solve the whole problem, not just the one you're looking at. This is another one. Don't let the no be the answer. Most of you are familiar with what they're called MP3 players, right? I got to be a part of that world that didn't know anything like this existed. And I had working for me a young man, manager, who was the center of the world of MP3 players when it was just emerging. Everybody in the industry knew him and focused on him. The labels hated each other but talked to him. The manufacturers hated each other but talked to him. I had him present the opportunity to our management. I was certain by the end of that meeting he was going to be fired for having such a stupid idea. So I did the only normal thing you would do. I hid him from management. In fact, what we did is we took the org chart of Texas Instruments, and every block we colored red, yellow, or green. He could talk to the greens. We encouraged the greens to talk to the yellows, and we avoided the reds at all cost. Surprisingly, a year or so later, after the product was successful, our MP3s were successful in general, the Wall Street Journal came in to ask how we did our innovation, so I told them that story. You know, it's always nice to tell the Wall Street Journal that you painted all your managers red. But they printed it, and our management for a while was going around asking each other, what color were you? And my direct manager, who was a guy I was certain was going to fire this man, a young man, came to me and said, well, what color was I? And I said, you were red. And he said, no, I was green. I said, how could you have been green? He said, well, I didn't fire him, did I? and so you look at that and you say, wow, if we'd have taken no, we'd have missed this whole opportunity of this fast-growing MP3 market. And so we got to participate in that because no was not an answer we were going to take. So another challenge, be patient. When we were doing DSP, starting the DSP business in the early 80s, and now you look back and you say, you know, everything in the world uses a digital signal processor. This is the greatest thing in the world. It was obviously a success. No, it wasn't. We began selling DSPs in 1982. It didn't see success until about 1994. Now, if you think about that, that seems to be what, 12 years? So we spent a decade or more as a business team creating digital signal processors, knowing that we owned 60% of the market. We controlled the market, except the market didn't exist. We had year after year where you'd list your top 10 customers, and each year was totally a different list. That is not a good way to start a business. But we were patient. We knew we had something valuable. We took the time to wait it out. for us to succeed. And surprisingly, over that 12, 14-year period, it was the same small team of people that stuck together and made it happen. We didn't abandon it, and all were rewarded very well for having stuck with it. And so, be patient. Be global. Most of you have a digital cell phone and think, how can I live without a digital cell phone? In fact, I tell the story a couple of years ago. I was flying to Dallas for my normal 2 days in Dallas. I live in Houston. And so as I was about halfway to the airport in Houston, I realized I just felt a little bit naked. There was something missing. And I realized I had left my cell phone. In fact, I'd left 2 cell phones at home. I had 2 cell phones, left them both at home. And now I had to think about how could I live 2 days in Dallas without a cell phone. Have you ever done that? Oh, it's terrible. No cell phone, and how do I talk to people when I want to talk to them? I'm stuck with something plugged into a wall. This is just terrible stuff. I got to my office in Dallas, and I have a loving wife who sent me an email, no words, just a picture of my cell phone next to my side of the bed. So now she knew. And I realized how important cell phones have become. But when it was beginning in the United States, we didn't think we needed digital cell phones. It was Europe who had a different analog cell phone standard for every country in Europe. And as you crossed boundaries, you couldn't use your cell phone anymore. And so they were working on this thing called GSM. They had defined the whole specification on how many TI DSPs it took to do. And they wanted us to create a new DSP to be able to do that. And our management in the US said, this is stupid. We don't need it. Analog system works fine. Go away. And so our European team decided to go on without the US knowing about it. Except I got involved with them because it meant I got to go spend time in Nice, France quite often to work with them. And if you've ever been there, you know that's not the worst thing in the world to do. But we did that because it was a global issue, and if you only have the management or the understanding of the United States, you miss this huge market. That business that we as a corporation thought wasn't going to be that important ended up being a $4 billion a year business. That's a good sized business, $4 billion a year business. And so that required us to think global rather than just think about what's local. And then finally, think about changing the world. This is a fun thing I had the opportunity of doing, and I don't know if you followed it at all. But there's a research center at University of Southern California. When I first met them, they were at Johns Hopkins University, that have made it their business to figure out how to give sight back to the blind. And so for people with retinitis pigmentosus or macular degeneration, they have figured out how to put electronics in the eye to give the sight back to those people. This is phenomenal stuff. And when we first met with them, I was very kind and said to them, there aren't enough blind people in the world for TI to be interested in you. Oh, we're recording that. Can you cut that part out? Yeah, I know you got it. But I said, you're going to have to solve 3 problems that we need to have solved to be able to sell to many, many other areas. And that is how to run electronics in your body using body heat, so you don't have to put batteries in. Learning how to do things with low enough power you don't do things like boil the eyeball. And third, packaging things so they can live in the salt water environment of the eye and live there for decades. Those are what we're interested in. Now, I will give you anything you need of technology TI has. So I made it my business to ship them any components, anything they needed to do their research. And I said, the second thing I will do is if you need an expert in the field that TI has, I will introduce you to that expert, and I am certain that expert will want to work with you, because what I'm going to say to the expert is, would you like to help the blind see? There's nobody going to say no to that. And that was the relationship I had with them the whole time. Now, the last thing they ended up doing that I got to be a part of was building a camera that would go in the eye so that the whole circuit would be in the eye. And it was the size of a grain of rice. And so the fun I had with them is, what else could I do with a camera the size of a grain of rice? And we brainstormed on that. I assume all of you learned to brainstorm. And came up with a list of products that we could sell using a camera the size of a grain of rice. And it ended up being, could possibly be a $10 billion a year market opportunity, of which the blind market would be 10 million. And so 0.1% of the opportunity was the poster child they were working with. And you think about that and you say, well, a lot of these things and change in the world will never make enough money to justify the use. Make it the poster child. Make it the thing that you start with that later on you can use everywhere else. And so that was what we did, and it's been a fun journey. They've got it FDA approved if you have relatives who have macular degeneration or retinitis pigmentosus. There's a cure now. It's not the best in the world, but there's a cure. So let me leave you with this last challenge, and that is maintain integrity. Most important thing you will have in a business relationship is trust, is integrity. I am a person of my word. I can work with a handshake. Yes, we'll go through all the paperwork, but I can work with a handshake. I've worked with Israeli companies, and I love to work with Israeli companies because they're significantly more innovative than anybody else in the world. And I asked one of them one day, why are you more innovative than anybody else in the world? And he said, look around us. We don't know if we'll be here tomorrow. We've got to innovate today. And I think that's good motivation. And so I've worked with a lot of those companies and can tell you story after story of how much fun it is to work with Israeli companies and the people who are innovating. But I've done this all around the world. I find that innovation is independent of your cultural background. I had an editor for the Indian Times quite a long time ago asked me whether or not India would ever become a technical power. And I said to her, you're asking me the wrong question, because Indians who have moved to the United States are extremely innovative and a very big power, technical power in the world. You need to ask the question, how do we keep them home? And the thing I'm finding that I love is people in India are beginning to stay home and innovate. People in China are beginning to stay home and innovate. People, and so we're finding that we're moving this game of innovation, of creativity, from, oh, there's only certain pockets around the world that you can live and innovate. No, you can do it anywhere. That's the love I have of a global society. And it also helps me because I only speak English. Everybody in the world speaks English to me. So with that, I'm going to stop my talk, and hopefully some of you will have a question or rebuttal for me.
So they already know I get the first two questions.
All right.
So you just laid out 7 principles that maybe this is how business ought to innovate.
Yeah.
But these folks aren't going to be running business maybe tomorrow, but they're going to be going to work. So can they live, do these 7 principles apply to them in their first job?
Yeah. And you have to be careful on that, yes. Remember, several of those things I said to do would get you fired. And that really leads me to this thing of challenges to the innovator's boss. Because that innovator, that creative person is going to be uniquely different from all the other employees. And those of you who have that bent to that creative thing of being just a little bit outside the box, a little bit distressful to anybody around them, you know who you are. You won't raise your hand. As I said earlier, you're crazy, you're not stupid. I didn't say that earlier, but that's the case. But if you look at the rules I have to the boss, and if you become that boss, then you have to earn the trust of this innovator. Don't let them go run. I told a manager of mine, I'm like a 2-year-old. And if any of you have ever been around 2-year-olds, if they're in another room, all is well as long as you hear noise. When it goes quiet, you know you better go look. Because a quiet 2-year-old is never a good thing. And a quiet innovator doesn't mean they're doing nothing. That means they don't want to tell you what they're doing. And so earn their trust. Cast the vision. Where are we heading? Keep them focused in the direction we're heading. Keep them pointed at their passion. I put a set of rules together of how do you hire game changers into your corporation. Most corporations is a random process. And the last step of hiring a game changer is let them change the game. Don't hire them and then tell them to do something else. Think beyond this month, this quarter, this year, and that's very hard to do. Be a cheerleader. Encourage them. They're going to be discouraged a lot. Give them permission to fail and protect them when they do. That's very important. Encourage them to think beyond your product line. Don't make your first answer no. And give them the freedom they've earned. And that last one's very important. If you haven't earned the freedom, don't expect to get it. So that's kind of what I see as the balance. If you walk in your first day and be belligerent on how you're going to innovate, you have to earn that. That's not just given to you.
So some of them, not me,
Yeah.
some of them may walk into a boss that does the exact opposite.
Oh, yeah.
So how do they survive?
There are two ways you survive under such a boss. One of them is you find a different boss. I won't bring up the hitman, but
So there's 3 ways.
and the other one is build trust with that boss. I had a boss once who I would go in and ask him if I go do something, and I'd see his eyes glaze over. And I finally realized what he was saying is, if you stay there, I'm going to say no. But if you get up and walk out at this point, I'll forget we had this conversation. And I learned to walk out a whole lot. But it's how do I, your boss wants to be successful for their whole career. They're stuck with this month, this year, this quarter, this year for a lot of business reasons. And if you can give them the feeling that you're going to take care of their future and not hurt their present day success, they're right there with you, and they'll show it in different ways. But there's going to be some bosses. I had a boss who we were going to do hearing aids in the Indian market. We had a solution that would give hearing back to people who were hard of hearing for a price that people in India could afford. We had a company in India who said, if you'll give us $10,000, we'll complete the design and make it available to the Indian market. My direct boss said, if I catch you giving them $10,000, I will fire you. And he sent a note to our Indian company and said, if I catch one of you hiding it under the table, I'll still fire them. Well, that's not a good boss to have, and he didn't last long with me. And I found other solutions. So
one other follow-up question related to that. So
you've had your 2. This is 3.
yeah, I know, but see, it's my class, so I get 3.
Ah.
Hey, but they may have a boss, and they may overstep. They may have broken their trust with their boss, not intentionally, maybe. Just how do they go repair that, right? And so,
Yeah.
something broke, and now what?
I'd like to say I've never had that happen.
Right.
You're going to force me to,
Hypothetically, if it happened to you,
yeah,
right?
you're going to force me to admit my failures. That's building that relationship, and that's why I say you need to spend time with your boss. If your boss isn't talking to you, there's an issue. And I found the worst thing in the world is to have my boss find out something I did from the CEO of the company. That just doesn't work well. And at least you need to say to your boss, I've done this, I don't want you to find out about it from your management. But let me tell you what I've done. And so it is building that relationship. And like I said, I've had one boss in my whole career who did that to me. And I just tried to figure out how to find another boss.
Good. All right, so no more questions from me.
Yeah, I doubt that.
No, terrible.
So any intelligent questions? Yes?
Hi, thank you so much for coming to speak with us. I was just wondering why you chose to always be the innovator and never moved up to the boss position.
Okay, the question is, why did I choose to be the innovator and not be the boss? I think that's pretty straightforward. I found that I could manage people, and in fact, I have an MBA, so I know all of the tools, but I found that if I did that, I kind of dreaded showing up every Monday morning. And so I would prefer to be in a position of doing something I love every day than being the boss. It just didn't matter to me. And so some of you will find that you just love the grind every day of putting a presentation for your management, getting chewed out by your managers, getting chewed out by your customers, and apparently hated by everybody. You're hearing that from an innovator, not from a manager. So be careful. Most of our managers at Texas Instruments loved that. It's not funny. I had a boss who said, I was chewed out by another customer, and smile. But that was what he was good at. What I was good at was creating new businesses. And in fact, I would tell people I get fired all the time when two words come up in conversation: schedule and profit. I'm just not good at those two words. And so once a business would get going well enough that we now had a schedule, which means we had a customer, and we were about to make some money, I was looking for somebody to take my place because it wasn't any fun. I could do it, but it wasn't any fun. I have a friend in Israel, a fellow by the name of Yossi Gross, who has over 500 patents on medical apparatus. And he would create something, start a business, and if you look at small startups, it's usually a creative person who starts the business as CEO. He would get fired, made CTO, get fired because he didn't handle people well, and finally get thrown out of the company. And then he'd innovate another one, start another one. And some business people in Israel pulled him over the side and said, look, we're going to start a venture capital fund based on your innovations. So we just want you to innovate. You come up with the ideas. We'll go find the CEO, the CTO, and the engineering team to go make it happen and let you go do the next one because that's what you do well. And it really comes down to what I did well was not manage people. What I did well was lead people. And I could get people to do things for me in spite of their management telling them not to do it. Because it's like, do you want to help the blind see? Piece of cake. And that was the reason. Yes?
Why can't you be a manager and an innovator at the same time?
You can, but the way business works, it's awfully hard to be creative as a business person. And so I found with my MBA, what I could do that very few people could do is I could manipulate the financial system. And when I got caught, I could say, I'm just a dumb old engineer, I don't understand that business stuff. And get away with it until they found out I had an MBA, and then I'd always get in trouble. But there's this side of business that says things have to happen. And they have to happen on schedule. Our customers do not deserve surprises from us. This is very, very important. And in my language, I call them the gearhead engineers. They just make it happen. I'm not one of those. And I have to work real hard to fit in that mold. So why should I? There's a place over here for me to innovate and create. And some of you who are, this is an issue of diversity in general. There are some of you who find it very difficult to show up and be a different person at work because that's what's required of you than you are normal. And it's not just race, color, creed, or sexual orientation that fits into that, it's personality. I did not fit well in the corporate structure of let's go make it happen. I'm better fitting into the part of the corporate structure that says, let me create the next big problem. And I've said this to student groups like this, I said, does it ever worry you that perhaps we're running out of problems to solve because as engineers we're taught to solve problems? Don't worry. My job is to create problems, and I can do it good. And I can create problems that takes hundreds of people, lots of years to fix. And so there are some of us who create problems and love it, and there's some of you who get scared to death. For many years, a friend and I were creating as we were creating new businesses, we put in a forecast to our management and said, we're going to create 3 new businesses every year. And they said, how are you going to do 3? And I said, well, we're going to look at 4 or 5 opportunities every quarter, and we figure every quarter we'll find a new business, but maybe one of the quarters we won't. So it'll be 3. And I put in a financial forecast for the 3 startups for the next year. And when I got one, I went back and said, I need the project order for this startup that I've already forecasted. No, we took all those out because you didn't have a project name for it. But I said we were going to do it. No, you didn't have a name. And it's that difference of mentality. And so whichever side you find it on, understand you need to appreciate the other side. And when I make nasty comments about when we did the speak and spell, our management just backed off because they didn't want to be blamed for the failure. They were doing a great favor to us because we're willing to take that on. And in fact, I made a comment a couple of months before we introduced it that I said it looks like it's going to be a raving success. All of our management's taking credit for it now. Okay. That's the way things are. But pick that area you're passionate about and don't be afraid to stay in it. That's the easiest answer. Yes, ma'am.
So that's a great comment. I found a lot of people recently as they're first starting, especially in sort of like the defense contract area, where they get discouraged because there's not a lot of change that's allowed.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more of a comment instead of a question, but when you find where you fit, which you might not know right now, you shouldn't be afraid to leave, and you shouldn't be able to, stay and feel like you have a responsibility to that company, because that company doesn't feel a responsibility to you. So you find the same.
Well, and you're making an important point, and that is, I said I worked at McDonnell Douglas while I was going to school here. I worked with a bunch of engineers who spent all week waiting for Friday and all weekend dreading Monday morning. And the one thing I learned as a co-op at that corporation was I would never have a job where I dreaded Monday morning. If I dreaded Monday morning, I would quit and go find another job. So that's one half of it. That says don't settle for a job you can't stand. Second is the rare commodity is you, not the job. There's another job out there. Don't ever find yourself in a position where you say, well, I really have to have this job. I can't afford to lose it. My best career moves when I was told to go away. And so remember what's a rare commodity. It's you, not the job. Does that help? But it is what you're seeing.
So Gene, did you ever fail? And if so, how did you recover?
Did I ever fail? Did I ever fail? I don't remember failing. Oh, and I'm certain I did. Talk to my management. They'll tell you I failed all the time. But it's the same question. You could ask it in a different way. I've been asked many times, what is the most enjoyable business start you did? Answer, the next one. I don't look at the past. And so failure, there were some business failures that we had. But I always say, since I always leave before the business manager gets on, they all were always screwed up by the business manager. And so I can deny it. But it is, I try to focus on what's that next thing rather than where did I fail.
So you learned a whole bunch from whatever you did.
Whatever I did, yeah, I just learned.
Part of life.
Part of life, and I always tell stories about how everybody else failed. Yeah. I'm in denial, give it up. That was his fourth question, you notice? Yes?
So we all have our own personal bottom line we have to take care of, and we all have bills. How do you find the courage to move on to a next job if you can't stand the one you're in? Or how do you transition between something you hate to something you love but haven't found yet?
Yeah, how do you have the courage to leave a company? How do you have the courage to leave the comfort of everything going on? That's a hard question, and if you're single, it's easier than if you're married, and it's easier if you're married without children. It's how encumbered are you? We're now in a society also where I can live anywhere I want and work anywhere I want simultaneously, so I don't have to move to where it is. And so there's a little bit of benefit to that. On the other hand, there is this still edgy thing that says you may have to move to another area. There's a lot of, and you just have to weigh that and say, how much do I want to live here? I had engineers working for me who worked so they could live, and I had other engineers working for me that lived so they could work. And so you just have to make that decision. But the simple rule is find the next job before you quit the one you're in. That's a whole lot easier. And that's, I said tongue-in-cheek, I got fired all those times. Well, I got fired in the sense of they replaced me with good management, and then I went off to start the next one. And so I already had my next job planned. In fact, I was talking to a PhD student over dinner one night, and they asked me, my title when I ended up at TI, retired, was Principal Fellow, which was the top technical person in the corporation. And they asked me, well, how did you do that? And I said, I was fortunate enough to take a technology that became required for everything we know today when it was an infant and grew it up. And the question back to me was, or the statement back to me, but there aren't any more like that. I said, I can name 3 right now. And so I'm always looking for what is that next thing. And so I know the next 3 that I think are going to, if you started now, would be revolutions in the world in the next 2 decades. And so there's a bit of that, and so you have to think about what is that next thing I can do. And the one comment I'll make about changing jobs, as an employer, I always worried about how many untruths were on your resumes. You need to also understand that corporation has as many untruths they're not going to tell you either until you get there. And so there are a lot of cases where you go to a job worse than the one you had. And I'll make a plug for all of you. If you haven't done a summer internship, you should have. The best interview process you ever have is an internship, because you get to interview the company. And so I hope I've answered your question. That's really a tough question.
Gene, some have to go to class, and so we'll end and we'll follow up with other questions.
All right.
So before we do that, thank you very much for
Yes.
sharing your story.
You're welcome.